Welcome to the Tool Review channel. Today we're taking a look at the GreenLee 0151-08D high leverage side cutting pliers, or Lineman's pliers as most people like to call them. Now these are precision machined with hardened cutting edges for superior strength and longer life. And if you haven't figured out already by the -08 in the model number, these are an 8-inch pair of Lineman pliers from GreenLee. So to start off the video here, we'll go ahead and take a look at the front of the pliers, and you can see right there you have the GreenLee logo laser etched onto the surface of the plier. You have some dried on oil or something of that nature from the manufacturing process. You have the registered trademark, and then coming down to the handles, you can see it is a double dip design. You have the green surrounded by the black dipped handles there on the outside, and then coming to the back of the pliers, as you can see right there, you have some warnings right here. Obviously they're not insulated, where proper eye protection, and then you have your model number right there as well, and you can see the back side of the rivet as well. And then you have this little ground down part right there, which I do believe is for gripping onto screws, staples, and stuff like that, and it allows you to, it would stop it right there instead of slipping through and potentially hurting your hands. So that's really about it for the detail on these. Nothing too crazy about them. We'll take a look at the teeth here on the front. You can see you have a nice cross-hatch design right there. So if you did need to grip onto something, and or if you were looking to twist some wires together, you could definitely use that cross-hatch design right there to get the job done. And then coming to the back of the pliers, you can see you have some more teeth right there. So if you needed to bend, or you were trying to grip onto a fish tape and pulling with it, those teeth would grip onto that and you would be able to do that task. And then you can see right here you have a pretty nice sized large cutting edge. As you can see, I've been using it and testing these out before making the video, but you can see you have a nice cutting edge right there. So with all that being said, let's get to some of the functionality of these pliers. So go ahead and zoom out there, and obviously these pliers for the most part do swing open. They are a little bit stiff, but they do open by themselves for the most part. I haven't oiled them up yet, but as you can see they do open quite easily, so I don't think I will be doing that anytime soon. So now we're going to bring in our first wire right here, which is some 18 gauge solid wire, and see if we can go ahead and cut through that. So we'll go ahead and cut that a few times, and as you can see, you are able to cut through that wire no problem, and you have that satisfying snapping sound as you cut through the wire, which is pretty relevant with most Lineman pliers. So now we're going to bring in some 18 gauge stranded wire and go ahead and cut through that for a few times, and as you can see, we are able to cut through that 18 gauge stranded wire no problem whatsoever. So go ahead and set that off to the side, and now we'll bring in some 14 gauge solid wire and see how well we can cut through that. And as you can see, these Lineman pliers have no problem whatsoever getting through that 14 gauge solid wire. So we'll go ahead and set that off to the side, and now we'll bring in some 14 gauge stranded wire, and we'll see how well we can cut through this. Should be a lot easier, and definitely is a lot easier to cut through the stranded wire than cutting through the solid wire. And as you can see, we were able to get through that 14 gauge stranded wire no problem whatsoever. So go ahead and throw that off to the side, and we'll bring in our next wire, which is going to be some 12 gauge solid wire. And we'll go ahead and give this a few cuts as well. And as you can see, you have to use a little bit more force than the 14 gauge wire, but you are able to get through that 12 gauge solid wire no problem whatsoever. So we'll go ahead and set that off to the side, and we'll bring in some 12 gauge stranded wire and go ahead and cut through this. And as you can see, we are able to cut through that no problem whatsoever. So we'll go ahead and set that off to the side, and now we'll bring in some 10 gauge solid wire, and see how well we can cut through this. And as you can see, we are able to cut through that 10 gauge solid wire. You definitely got to use a little bit more pressure than the 12 gauge solid wire, but you are able to cut through that 10 gauge solid wire no problem whatsoever. So now we'll bring in some 10 gauge stranded wire and see how well we can get through this. And as you can see right there, we are able to get through that 10 gauge stranded wire no problem whatsoever. So go ahead and throw that off to the side. And now we'll bring in some Romex wire right here. So we got some 14-2 with ground. So it's 3 wires in there in total. And we'll see how well we can cut through this. So being an 8-inch, you don't have as much leverage as a 9-inch pair of Lineman's pliers. But we'll go ahead and see how well we are able to cut through this 14 gauge. And as you can see right there, we are able to cut through this 14-2 Romex wire no problem whatsoever. So we'll go ahead and set that off to the side. And we'll bring in some 12-2 with ground, and we will see how well we can cut through this. So you're probably going to need a little bit more leverage, or a little bit more force, I should say, to get through it. But as you can see right there, we are able to do it no problem whatsoever. You just definitely have to use a little bit more leverage than the 14 gauge. Obviously, you're cutting through 3 12-gauge wires. So you're definitely going to struggle with that a little bit. But now we're going to bring in a couple of other wires, which I don't think I've ever brought in on the channel before. We're going to bring in some 8-gauge stranded wire and see if these guys can cut through this, which I'm almost positive they should be able to cut through it, but you never know. But as you can see, we are able to cut through that 18-gauge or that 8-gauge stranded wire, no problem whatsoever. So we'll go ahead and set that off to the side, and we'll bring in our final wire, which is some 6 solid wire right here, and we'll see how well we can cut through this, guys. Probably going to be a little bit of a struggle, but I think these should be able to get through it no problem. Definitely have to use a little bit more leverage, but as you can see, you are able to cut through that 6-gauge stranded wire, no problem whatsoever. So we'll go ahead and clear all that out of the background here, and we'll get that guy out of there. And we will see if the cutting jaws or the cutting knives on here are strong enough to strip this 6-gauge stranded wire, because sometimes you run into wire that you don't have a pair of wire strippers for, and you end up using, you know, your Lineman's pliers, or you could use wire strippers if you want the cutting edges on those. I do prefer to just use Lineman pliers for thick wire, so we'll go ahead and cut that outer insulation around. Went a little deep, but as you can see, you are able to strip that 6-gauge stranded wire no problem whatsoever, and obviously you are able to cut it off no problem whatsoever. So we'll go ahead and set that off to the side. And overall, these are definitely a pretty nice pair of Lineman's pliers from GreenLee. You can see a little bit of oil coming out of the joint there, and it's nothing too crazy to worry about. So these are definitely a nice pair of Lineman's pliers, or side cutting pliers, whatever you like to call them, from GreenLee Tools. They're not typically that common, I would say, to find in a retail store. You're not going to find these in, you know, your Lowe's or your Home Depot. At least I have been able to find them in mine. I did pick these up at my local Menards, though, and they, surprisingly enough, they weren't in the electrical section. They were just in the regular hand tool section, which I did kind of find was pretty odd, since like the majority of all your other like linesman pliers, diagonal cutters and stuff at Menards are typically in the electrical section, especially when it's a, you know, electrical brand of tools. But that's just one thing I noticed about that, but we're getting sidetracked here. So overall, these are definitely a nice pair of Lineman pliers from GreenLee. If you're looking to add them to your lineup of tools, I definitely can recommend them. Don't really have any complaints about them. They weren't fairly that expensive either. So with that being said, that's all I have for this video. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And I will also try to leave a few links in the comments, or at least in the video description, to where you can buy these pliers from. So I will leave a link to where I picked them up at Menards. So if you have a local Menards by you, you can just, you know, go onto the website and see how many your local store has in stock. I will also leave a link to GreenLee's website that'll give you a little bit more information about these Lineman pliers or side cutting pliers as well. And I'll see if I can find a couple more online links for those of you that don't have a Menards around you that would like to purchase this pair of pliers. I will find a couple other links for you as well. But that's all I have for this video. Thank you for watching, and if you did enjoy the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up as well. But that's all I have, so stay tuned for the next video to be uploaded.